There is a narrow strip of water 21 miles wide at its tightest point. It sits between the southern coast of Iran and the northern shores of Oman, connecting the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea. On any given day before 2026, approximately 20 million barrels of oil pass through it, roughly 1/5 of everything the world consumes, liquefied natural gas from Qatar, crude from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and the UAE, the economic lifeblood of Asia, Europe, and beyond. Geopolitical strategists had spent decades calling it the single most important choke point on Earth. In the spring of 2026, the world found out exactly what that meant when Iran slammed it shut, and what happened next set a precedent that will define naval warfare for a generation. To understand how the United States launched one of the most complex and technologically audacious maritime campaigns in modern history, you have to go back to where the crisis began, not in February 2026, but much earlier. The tension between Washington, Tehran, and Tel Aviv had been building through a cascade of failed diplomacy, backroom ultimatums, and escalating strikes. Nuclear negotiations in Geneva collapsed. In the summer of 2025, the United States and Israel fought what analysts called the 12-day war, a brief but ferocious exchange of airstrikes on Iranian military infrastructure. Iran survived it, hardened, and drew a lesson that would shape its next move. The Strait of Hormuz was its ultimate weapon, the one card that could inflict pain on the entire global economy simultaneously. By January 2026, the pressure inside Iran had reached a breaking point through an entirely different channel. The largest domestic protests since the 1979 revolution had erupted across Iranian cities, and the security forces of the Islamic Republic responded with lethal force, killing thousands. The images reached the world. President Donald Trump responded with threats of military action and ordered the largest American military buildup in the Middle East since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group was dispatched to the region in mid-January, arriving on the 26th with guided missile destroyers, cruisers, FA-18E Super Hornets, EA-18G Growlers, F-35C Lightning IIs, and a full complement of electronic warfare assets. By February, 2 carrier strike groups were operating simultaneously in and around the region, the largest such deployment since the opening of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, did not blink. On February 16th, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps conducted live-fire naval drills in the Strait of Hormuz and briefly closed sections of the waterway, the first time Iran had done anything like it since the 1980s. Khamenei issued his most chilling warning yet, saying that American warships in the Gulf could be sent to the bottom of the sea and that the strongest army in the world might receive a blow from which it could not recover. His generals were not speaking in abstractions. Iran had spent 4 decades constructing a layered anti-access architecture specifically designed to deny freedom of navigation through those 21 miles. Limpet mines on the sea floor, hundreds of fast attack craft capable of swarming any vessel, anti-ship cruise missiles with ranges stretching over 1,000 kilometers, and deeply buried hardened bunkers along the southern Iranian coast that were designed to survive any conventional airstrike. This was not a bluff. It was a war machine built for exactly this scenario. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury, a coordinated, simultaneous wave of strikes across Iran targeting military facilities, nuclear sites, air defense networks, and, in a decision that shocked the world, the leadership structure of the Islamic Republic itself. Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran for over 3 decades, was killed. The opening night of the operation, intelligence services later revealed, had been preceded by months of strategic and operational deception, false satellite imagery, concealed aircraft preparations, and the deliberate creation of a misleading picture designed to deny Tehran any warning. Senior Iranian officials, including Khamenei, had gathered together in the hours before the strikes, apparently believing the threat had passed. It had not. Within hours, the architecture of the Islamic Republic's command structure was shattered. Iran's response was immediate and furious. Missile and drone attacks rained down on American military bases across the region, on Israeli cities, and on Gulf states from Bahrain to Qatar. And then came the order that the entire global economy had dreaded for 40 years. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps transmitted warnings via VHF radio to every vessel in the Strait of Hormuz. The message was unambiguous. No ship was allowed to pass. On March 2nd, a senior IRGC official confirmed on the record that the strait was closed and threatened to set fire to any vessel that attempted transit. Within hours, every tanker broadcasting an automatic identification system signal disappeared from tracking screens. By midnight, the strait had gone dark. Approximately 150 freight ships, many of them oil tankers, dropped anchor outside the chokepoint and waited. Tanker traffic, which had averaged around 138 ships per day, fell first by 70%, then to nearly zero. Brent crude, which had been trading around $65 per barrel before the war, surged toward $100 within days and was approaching $116 a barrel by mid-March. The International Energy Agency launched the largest emergency strategic reserve release in its history. The world was staring into an economic abyss. The IRGC was not just issuing warnings, it was acting on them. By March 12th, Iranian forces had made 21 confirmed attacks on merchant ships. The U.S.-flagged tanker Stena Imperative was struck twice at the port of Bahrain, killing a port worker and injuring 2 others. 2 oil tankers were attacked by Iranian drone boats off the port of Basra, set ablaze with at least 1 crew member killed. A Thailand-flagged bulk carrier, the Mayuri Nari, caught fire after being hit, with 20 crew members rescued by the Royal Navy of Oman while 3 others remained missing. Iran's IRGC had also begun seizing foreign-flagged tankers near Farsi Island, towing them to Iranian ports. On March 10th, American military intelligence confirmed what many had feared. Iran had begun planting naval mines in the strait itself. Trump demanded Iran remove them immediately. The U.S. military responded by destroying 16 Iranian mine-laying watercraft. Iran's closure strategy, as military analysts quickly recognized, did not require a conventional naval blockade. Tehran's surface fleet had been largely degraded by early American and Israeli strikes. What Iran was executing instead was something strategists called an insurance blockade, a doctrine that required only the occasional attack and the credible threat of mines to make insurance premiums prohibitively expensive for commercial shipping companies, effectively achieving closure without needing to physically stop every ship. War risk insurance premiums for passage through the strait had already risen from 0.125% of a vessel's value to between 0.2 and 0.4%, a $250,000 increase per transit for a very large crude carrier. By early March, protection and indemnity insurance war coverage was pulled entirely for certain dates, making the economic calculus impossible for any responsible shipping operator to justify. Iran's asymmetric doctrine was working precisely as designed. The diplomatic response was swift but deeply fractured. France's President Macron announced a multinational escort mission within the framework of Operation Aspides, dispatching a dozen ships to the broader region and pledging 2 frigates specifically for strait escort duties. India proposed deploying its navy to secure its own oil supplies. Britain, Germany, and Italy began working to support commercial shipping. But on March 15th, President Trump made a demand that exposed the fracture lines of the Western alliance in stark relief, calling on every nation that received oil through the strait to take military responsibility for securing it themselves. The following day, NATO partners, including Germany, Spain, Italy, the United Kingdom, Australia, South Korea, and Japan, all publicly declined. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius delivered the bluntest assessment. This was not their war, and they had not started it. Trump called their decision a very foolish mistake and declared that the United States did not need anyone's help. What followed was the decision point that would define the campaign. On March 17th, U.S. Central Command announced something that made military analysts around the world stop cold. CENTCOM had employed multiple GBU-72 advanced 5K penetrator munitions, 5,000-pound bunker-busting bombs, against hardened underground missile silos along Iran's southern coastline near the strait. The GBU-72 is a GPS and inertially guided weapon with a thick steel casing engineered to penetrate over 60 meters of soil or 20 meters of reinforced concrete before detonating inside the structure, collapsing it from within. It was the first combat use of this weapon system in Operation Epic Fury, and only the second time it had ever been deployed in combat anywhere in the world. Its first use had been against an underground Houthi site in Yemen in May 2024. According to U.S. officials, the strikes reduced Iran's missile stockpile along the Hormuz corridor by approximately 90%. The underground bunkers that Iranian planners had spent years constructing to make their anti-ship arsenal invulnerable to conventional air power had, in a matter of hours, become their tombs. 2 days later, on March 19th, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Dan Kane stepped to the podium at the Pentagon and announced that the United States had formally begun its military campaign to open the Strait of Hormuz. The operation combined assets that had never before been used together in this kind of maritime environment. A-10 Thunderbolt II aircraft, the legendary Warthog, a ground attack plane that had been hunting and killing armored targets for 50 years, had entered the fight along Iran's southern flank and were now hunting Iranian fast attack watercraft in the strait itself. Boeing AH-64 Apache helicopter gunships had joined the campaign on the southern side, targeting one-way attack drones that Iran was deploying against commercial shipping. CENTCOM released unclassified footage showing American strikes obliterating Iranian naval assets in real time. The message was deliberate and unmistakable. The United States was dismantling Iran's maritime infrastructure piece by piece, in public, on camera, for the world to watch. The scale of what CENTCOM was achieving in just 3 weeks of combat operations was staggering. By March 21st, Admiral Brad Cooper, the commander of U.S. Central Command, announced that American forces had struck over 8,000 Iranian targets and destroyed more than 130 Iranian naval vessels. He described the destruction of the Iranian fleet as the largest elimination of a navy over a 3-week period since the Second World War. American aircraft had flown over 8,000 combat sorties. The longest field artillery strike in the history of the United States Army had been executed during the campaign. CENTCOM also deployed autonomous unmanned surface vessels, robotic ghost boats from Unmanned Surface Vessel Squadron 3, to patrol the strait and engage Iranian fast attack craft, fundamentally changing the calculus of swarm warfare in one of the world's most contested waterways. Israel, operating in parallel, contributed a strike that altered the operational command of Iran's entire maritime blockade. On March 26th, Israeli intelligence assets assassinated Alireza Tangsiri, the IRGC naval commander personally responsible for overseeing the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz stated that Tangsiri had been directly responsible for the campaign of terror against international shipping. With his death, the nerve center coordinating Iran's blockade strategy was severed at the top, and yet, as analysts at the Foreign Policy Research Institute noted with grim precision, reopening the strait was not simply a matter of military supremacy. Even with Iran's surface navy effectively destroyed, the threat did not vanish. Mobile anti-ship cruise missile launchers, dispersed across Iran's interior, capable of firing from over 1,000 kilometers away, hidden among terrain that generates massive radar clutter, remain survivable even against the most advanced American reconnaissance capabilities. Mines were the other nightmare. In 1991, after the first Gulf War, it took 4 months and over 40 Allied minesweepers working in a permissive environment with Iraqi minefield charts to clear a route for shipping. The United States had decommissioned much of its mine countermeasures capability in recent years. The prospect of clearing Iranian mines from the narrow, contested waters of the strait, while offensive operations continued and Iran retained residual strike capability, was a challenge that even the most optimistic Pentagon planners acknowledged could take weeks or months. Trump issued an ultimatum on March 21st, demanding Iran fully open the strait without threat within 48 hours or face strikes on its power infrastructure, beginning with the largest facility first. Iran doubled down, threatening to completely close the strait and strike energy and desalination facilities across the region, the water that millions of people in the Gulf depended on for survival. The confrontation had reached an intensity that bore no resemblance to any American military engagement since the Cold War. On April 1st, airstrikes hit Hengam Island, a strategically positioned Iranian island inside the strait itself, causing casualties, including one critical injury. The following day, Bahrain brought a resolution to the United Nations Security Council calling for authorization of all necessary means to open the waterway. Russia, China, and France blocked it. The geopolitical fault lines of the 21st century were on full display. Meanwhile, the global consequences were cascading. Energy markets described the disruption as the largest supply shock since the 1970s oil embargo. 20% of the world's daily oil supply was strangled. China, which received a third of its oil through the strait, was dealing with energy shortfalls it had not seen in generations. Europe, which depended on Qatar for 12 to 14% of its liquefied natural gas, was scrambling. Iran began granting selective passage to certain nations. China, Russia, India, Iraq, Pakistan, Malaysia, Thailand, and the Philippines were eventually permitted access through diplomatic arrangements, effectively using the strait as a geopolitical sorting mechanism, rewarding states that had not joined the American coalition and punishing those that had. The Shadow Fleet, vessels operating without standard identification and often with links to sanctioned states, made up half of all transits through the strait in March. The architecture of international maritime law was bending under the pressure of raw power. What the United States military demonstrated in March 2026 was simultaneously a display of unprecedented capability and a confrontation with the hard limits of conventional power projection. The GBU-72 bunker busters proved that decades of Iranian investment in hardened underground infrastructure could be neutralized within hours by the right munition deployed with precision. The A-10 Warthog, a plane the Air Force had tried to retire for years, demonstrated that its combination of low-speed maneuverability, heavy cannon, and survivability made it uniquely suited to hunting fast attack craft in a maritime environment that more sophisticated aircraft could not operate in as effectively. The autonomous drone boats of USV Ron-3 wrote a new chapter in unmanned naval warfare. And CENTCOM's public release of strike footage in real time transformed the campaign into a strategic communication operation as much as a military one, broadcasting to every shipping company, every insurance underwriter, and every allied and adversarial government exactly what American firepower was capable of. The Strait of Hormuz in April 2026 is not yet fully open. It is not yet safe. The campaign to restore freedom of navigation is ongoing, contested, and carrying risks that even the most powerful military on earth cannot eliminate overnight. But what the United States military did in the span of 35 days, destroying over 140 Iranian naval vessels, eliminating the underground missile arsenal threatening the waterway, deploying technologies that had never before been used in this kind of fight, and absorbing retaliatory strikes while maintaining air superiority across a theater that spans an entire nation, changed the strategic calculus of every power that has ever contemplated using a maritime chokepoint as a weapon. The world's most critical waterway became the world's most dangerous battleground. And in the water and the fire and the wreckage of what Iran built over 40 years, the U.S. military drew a line that will not easily be erased from the memory of anyone who commands a fleet, charts a tanker's course, or sits in a war room and stares at a map of the Persian Gulf.